Hello, everyone. Dr. Eames here. This time I'd like to talk to you about job analysis. Now, job analysis is one of those things that the HR manager does that really is at the core of all their duties, and it really supports most of the other operations and things that are required. So let's talk about some of these things. First of all, HR managers do recruitment selection. Recruitment means making decisions about what channel you're going to use, or channels, of course, to find the people you need for various jobs. You will select them, and at some point you'll continue the process. After you've wintered it down to certain candidates, you'll be able to select among them and then begin the hiring process itself. You'll also develop the compensation systems that are needed. And these systems, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. There is plenty of information out there on the internet and so forth that you can use. And certainly pay rates and wage scales are going to vary by geographical location in the country, and the reality of that it costs different amounts to live in different parts of the country. You will do planning for the future, forecasts and demands, so that you'll understand your labor workforce and be able to be a real strategic partner in the organization. You'll handle the career development, professional advancement, and so forth of your employees, and you'll do it by creating training programs for that specific purpose, as well as developing training for general topics that all organizations need, like sexual harassment training or cross-cultural training, and those sorts of things. We'll also do possibly some performance evaluations. We don't see as many of these being done as we've seen in the past. And generally, there is a trend out there for certain types of organizations, in particular, flatter organizations, that have sort of abandoned the idea of an annual performance evaluation. And they do so because flatter companies really are getting more work done with fewer people. There's a greater sense of teamwork, and there's a much more informal attitude between the managers and the employees and so forth. So it really is a different atmosphere, and it's more of an atmosphere of people working together. In that sense, the manager would not feel the real necessity to give an annual performance evaluation when they already know day to day how good any given employee is at performing or producing whatever it is you're doing. Now, risk management is one of those things that HR contributes to. And here we're not talking about economic or financial risk management. We're talking about the physical areas where people work. So your role really in the HR department would be identifying job hazards. And there could be a number of these. If you have machinery, if you have chemicals, if you have processes that require isolation of a certain type or have safety concerns, all of these things have to be managed by policies and procedures with safety in mind. And then, of course, you're going to be involved heavily in job design, which is one of the basic tenets of job analysis overall. And you will be gathering data to tell you what are the job activities that relate to this particular job, and how does this job relate to accomplishing the mission of the organization. And certainly, jobs have to be reevaluated over time. So as you can see, by working through these elements, that the HR manager is busy in so many different areas. So our definition of a job analysis has to say that it is a process, and it's a systematic process wherein the manager will collect data, and the data is aimed at determining what are the KSOCs for this particular job. And we need to know that so that when we hire and people for the position, that when we recruit them and select them and so forth, that we're going to find the people that are going to be successful. In other words, that we have PE fit, that we're getting the best person and the good fit for the job, so they can do the job and they're able to make the judgments that are necessary in that role. Well, when it comes to recruitment and selection, what's really important here, again, is that we identify the KSOCs. So again, key skills, abilities, other characteristics that are needed to perform that actual job. And there are steps in the process of recruitment selection. So let me just talk about these for a moment. First of all, you would know when there's a vacancy as the HR manager. You should know, hopefully, ahead of time that there's a vacancy. And but you don't always have that luxury. Sometimes people just quit. Sometimes people are terminated. Sometimes people retire and they don't tell you ahead of time. But most of the time, you're going to get some notice. You're going to know ahead of time if somebody's retiring or whatever. So you identify that there is a vacancy and you evaluate the need. You develop what is it that that job is about, so a position description, and then really that position description is the job design. And you have to include all the elements that are necessary for the legal side of it to satisfy the requirements there, but specifically so that you can let the person know what you want that is looking for work. And so you can get the best fit. So you don't want to leave anything out that's really important. You develop your recruitment plan. That's basically choosing the channels that you're going to place your advertising in. You could use an agency. You could do it all yourself. You could do some combination of using an agency. There are lots of agencies and companies out there that are willing to do this outsourcing for you. Two big recruiters out there right now would be Indeed and ZipRecruiter. Both of those are national in scope, but you don't necessarily have to choose a national company. You could choose a local labor-oriented firm that could help you with your recruitment, a local agency that is actually providing workers of various types, depending on their expertise. So there's a lot of information for you to consider, and there are different methods and so forth to choose from when you're developing that recruitment plan. Sometimes you may have a search committee formed to do the work, and sometimes it may be done by the HR department. Other times, depending on the industry and so forth, you might select a search committee. That's the case in most education institutions. For instance, when they need to hire a new faculty member, particularly at colleges and universities, they form a search committee. They do work with the HR department. The position in that sort of industry has to be official and allotted and all of that. But when the approvals are done, the search committee handles everything and all the details and so forth of finding people and going through the process. And then once you've done all that, you're posting the position in the channels you've chosen, or the search committee is doing that, and you're implementing that plan and following through. At that point, hopefully you will find enough qualified applicants and you start to winnow down the stack of resumes and so forth, and you develop a shorter list. From that shorter list, you will move to the next step, which is to conduct that interview. And there is nothing that is superior to talking to people face to face. Whether it's a Zoom interview or an in-person interview, you can still see a person, you can see their facial expressions, and you can hear the tone of their voice. That's what's really important in the interview. So either of those methods are probably the top ways to go. And then you have to make that crucial decision from the people that are qualified, that you've identified, who are you going to hire? That's when you really, at some point, things don't always go your way. You've selected and you've made a job offer, and now you're in that finalization. That could mean some negotiation with the future employee. And sometimes during that process, the employee has developed other leads. Maybe they've been talking to other companies and so forth, and you might actually be their second or third choice, and they could be your first or second choice and so forth. Well, both parties in this sort of situation do not know what the other is thinking and what the strategies are normally. And so you finalize that recruitment, and you may have to do the process all over again if your top applicant turns you down. But that's the reason that you gather enough applicants who are qualified. So as you work through the process, you can finally find the qualified person that you need. So here are the 3 reasons we perform job design. Whenever you start up a business, there's an obvious need that one of the very first things you do after you've established the fact that you have enough money to start the business, you know what you're doing, and you have the plan, you have to say, what jobs do I need? And then at that point, you create the jobs, you write the job descriptions. You're basically doing job analysis without any of the tools that an existing organization would do. So when you create a business organization, you perform job design. You also do job design as a strategic tool. Jobs change over time. The HR department wants to make a strategic contribution to the overall organization. One of the things that you can do is make sure that all the jobs are aligned with the organization's mission and that you're doing the very best you can with your employees in regards to training and professional development and so forth. And then the third reason, and quite often is the most common reason, is when the requirements of the job has changed. Now, if someone has been in a job for a long time, they're called an incumbent. So if an incumbent leaves a job and that job really hasn't been recruited or filled in a while, you can be certain that things have changed from the original description when that person was hired, because that is normal in an organization that procedures and policies change over time. So that's a big reason why we would have to do job design. So there is some legal ramifications. There are legal ramifications, I should say, for doing a good job with this analysis of data to build that job design and so forth. You could use tests. Sometimes you need to test some potential employees and so forth. But you also, when you give these tests, they're based on job analysis that you've done for some given job. So that's just something that's we do want to keep in mind, that anything that we do has to be based on the information that we're gathering at any given point in time about a given job. And so the tests, the promotion, the frequency and the intervals that pay increases happen, all of that happens on information you've gathered at some point in time to design a job. So you develop a job description. And within that job description of what does the person actually do, there are very specific things that you might have to address. Things like whether or not a person requires a certain license or certification, those sorts of things. So this job analysis data is going to form the legal basis for all the decisions that you make. And any job that you design is going to fall into a family of jobs. That's generally how we classify jobs, are in families of jobs. And so recruiting companies will use families of jobs and they will classify jobs in these different areas. And so you will do the same thing in your local organization. It helps you comply with various legal requirements, in particular, the ADA. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, certainly there are things in there that you have to be aware of, that if someone has to lift weight or move something around, and there's certain physical things that happen on the job, you have to very clearly specify those in your job description. That complies with the legal side. So there are a variety of things that are required that you want to find out about when you're doing this job analysis. So a lot of the information you collect is going to be about the activities of the job itself, certainly, but the other things that are more about what is required of the person doing that job. Well, their education requirements, that certainly matters. Can they operate a certain type of equipment? Is experience needed? What type of tools are they going to use? A computer terminal is considered a tool. It's considered a piece of equipment. What level of facility do they need to have with whatever it is that's required? And then you have to mention, what are the working conditions for this job? Is it a warehouse setting? Is it a factory environment? Is it an office setting? Those things matter and you must mention them. Is there travel required? Is it indoor and outdoor, or one of the other? If there are responsibilities with the job, such as something that's supervisory or management in nature, you have to be very careful here, because any person that does supervisory or management sort of duties can be considered a manager, and then they would be an exempt employee. An exempt employee is not held to overtime rules, and they generally are salaried employees. The non-exempt employees are skilled employees doing jobs, and they're subject to all the labor laws and regulations. So time and a half for overtime and so forth. So if there are management or supervisory responsibilities, you have to be very clear, and you have to be careful yourself that if you're hiring someone for that type of an environment, you probably should be hiring a manager. As well, these other things that are required here, what is the level of interpersonal or communication skills? It may be that the person works fairly autonomous. Maybe they don't need those things. But on the other hand, maybe they interact frequently internally, or maybe they interact frequently externally to parties outside the company, or maybe it's a combination of both. If that is a significant part of the job, it needs to be mentioned, and the level of capacity. And then any particular contacts that need to be made on a regular basis. If you're in contact with a regular agency or department of the government or local, state, or federal, whatever it is, you should mention that the job entitles you as a liaison doing such and such. So you spell out these contacts, whether they're internal, external, and so forth. And in particular, you have to round it out with a very concise description of the KSOCs. That's incredibly important. It covers everything legally. It helps you get the very best people and so forth. So this really does matter. There are a variety of methods to collect job data. So let me just go over these briefly with you. The top two are there for a reason. They are the most prevalent in use, and they are the most effective for gathering job data when you have to do a job design and so forth. So interview. And what do? You interview incumbents, the person currently doing the job. So this is where it is nice if you do have a time period where you know the job is going to be vacated, you get a chance if it's something that requires a job design. Now, if it's something where the job has regular turnover, a number of people are doing the same job, and you may not need to do a job design every time. But if it's not that frequent, that's really what triggers this. So the interview is where you go. But you don't stop with the current incumbent only. You interview their immediate supervisor. You interview any staff experts who may be there in the organization, and then you try and interview anyone who has a regular role that interacts not with the person personally, but with the job on a regular basis. So those are all different places you can gather interview information. And then questionnaires. Generally, a questionnaire is structured. That means it's got specific questions, and you use the same questions for each person that you talk to or that you deliver the questionnaire to. These are a lot like surveys and so forth. Quite often, though, surveys are more pick and answer, where structured questionnaires might also be open-ended questions where you get to ask them to discuss something or tell me what you think. And from that, you can, derive some information. So open-ended questions, give it to the incumbents, and also give the same ones to the supervisor and so forth. Now you can use these structured task checklists. You have what you think are the tasks currently being done by the job. You go through, ask questions about that, and it may be that you're going to cross some of those off and you're going to add some others in. As you go through your structured questionnaire and your structured task checklist, the tasks actually that you know about currently about the job. And then you can do observation. You can look and watch over a time period the incumbent do their job. You can take notes and so forth. Well, this is going to work in only certain environments. If the incumbent is doing a physical sort of job, then that's fine. You can take notes, you can observe, and you can learn quite a lot. Procedures, processes, and so forth. But if the incumbent is a knowledge worker, that type of job where they're sitting at a terminal, well, you certainly cannot observe their cognitive processes and so forth. So it won't be very helpful there. So that's why it's farther down on the list of the most used techniques. But it's not something that should be overlooked if you have the opportunity. You might want to sit and observe someone if they have a lot of telephone interaction with another person. That would be something that you could listen to, decide if it's appropriate or not, take notes on, if it's relevant to the job, if it's one of the KSOCs. One of the key skills is good vocal skills and so forth on the phone. So that's a possibility there. You could also ask, when you find out that a job is going to be changed or vacated, I should say, or if you know that a job is going to change due to something that the organization is going to do, a change in procedures or something, you might request that the incumbent start doing a diary or a log of events. And this would be a daily, really a record of what did I do, not writing a lot, just entries, phone call to this department, finished a report on such and such, did these very specific things. The same thing for critical incident technique. You can observe or you can identify specific behaviors here and then use that information to understand possibilities that might happen on that job. So all of these things will work together depending. And then certainly you want to use the internet for data collection. And there are two very important sources here you shouldn't overlook. The US Department of Labor has just a plethora of information. It's all free and it's down to the very minute detail. You can find out about any job in some small city, even like where you at right now in the Midwest, in a rural area. You can find out what jobs are there, how many of them are there, how many men do the jobs, how many women, how many full-time jobs, how many part-time. All of this stuff is updated regularly, and it's done for different job classifications and so forth all over the country. The website is absolutely huge. You go to the website and you start running searches depending on what it is you're trying to find out. So the US Department of Labor is a fantastic source. As well is ONET. ONET is a nonprofit that provides information on hundreds, I believe it's over 850 job classifications. It's all free. It's very detailed. It's full of job descriptions, information on different wage rates in different parts of the country, and so forth. And then, so certainly, like I mentioned, any or all of these methods are the way to go when you have to collect job data to do this job analysis. So you have to really undergo the process of designing a job analysis program. If you've been in the job a while, then you'll do it the same sort of way over and over. So you need to understand what sort of information do I need to collect and how am I going to really use it? So you do not want certainly to waste your time collecting information you don't need. You're always going to be collecting information about your employees. Whether or not this crosses the line for certain employees just depends on the individual. One thing that HR managers do in their HRIS systems, the human resource information systems, our spreadsheets and so forth, where you can input data that you've learned about your employees' habits, their interests, their hobbies, things that help you understand them better. When they get more education, they earn a certificate, they learn a new ability of some type, they make an accomplishment or an achievement. If you know about it, you can encourage your employees to report this stuff to you, enter it into your database. And why would you do that? Well, you would certainly want to look internally, and for many jobs when you're transferring, promoting, and so forth, filling vacancies, and this information helps you understand who might be a good fit that I could interview, that you could take the process farther. But people are indeed a little sensitive, and sometimes some employees may view that as invading their privacy. I think you just have to learn that fine line to walk between invading someone's privacy and just gathering generalized information that they don't mind sharing. So that is something that depends on the culture of your organization and so forth. You've got to really understand what is the mission of your organization? How does it operate? How does it get everything done? And you have, in other words, you have to understand the cycle of work that is going on there. You do not have to know all the technical details, certainly, of who does what in every job. That's not your job. But what you do need to know is, how are things done in general? What are the general processes? What are we accomplishing? And in general, how do we do it? And where's the rise and fall of the work, and what is pertinent to the human resource department? So you will be collecting information in this job analysis. You're going to find out how many incumbents you have in any given job that's the same job, where are they located, and so forth. Is the working conditions the same for all of them? What are the working conditions? What are the various environments the various jobs are working in? What are the KSOCs really? What technology will be needed? And are there personal factors that go beyond some of this, that when you really start looking at competencies and behaviors, like good interpersonal skills on the telephone and things like that? Those are personal factors. And you can find those things out through interview and questionnaire and so forth from your employees that you have and from potential clients as well. You certainly want to be a strategic partner as an HR professional. And so your focus really is going to narrow in on the KSOCs. You're going to be thinking about the future. And is the company going to change at a certain point? Is that in the strategic plan? And is that change going to involve the workforce? And almost certainly changes that are significant are going to involve the workforce. The number of workers needed, the types of jobs needed. Some jobs might go away, other jobs may be modified, other new jobs might be added. You need to prepare for the future. And so you have to be thinking about this when you do the job analysis, that the incumbent now is doing certain things, but we're going to want them to do a couple other new things when we add the new person. And this is quite common in organizations. So you want to think strategically, really be thinking in a futuristic manner so that you know where you're going with this whole thing. Now, when it comes to the job description and the specification itself, be specific. Very specific about the tasks, the duties, the responsibilities, however you want to talk about it. You've got to list the KSOCs very specifically. You can't leave any out. Everything that's required to do the job successfully has to be listed. So this is important, that we don't mislead anybody, and that we also don't have to wade through a large pile of applicants who really aren't qualified. And why aren't they qualified? Maybe we didn't do a good enough job on our job design that resulted in a job description that we could market out there. So this stuff really has an importance factor. Now, competency modeling, really, competencies themselves, these are observable and measurable behaviors that an incumbent would display doing any particular job, doing the performance of the job. You want to identify those if you don't already know what they are. You certainly want to be able to identify them if you're doing some observations and so forth, or through your structured questionnaire or in the interview. You want to make sure that you understand all the behaviors that are needed. And so you do what is called competency-based job modeling. This is just a way of describing a job through behavioral as well as skills that are required to do the job. And so it's going to expand a little bit on traditional job analysis, but this is what's required in today's world. The text really in this chapter has an extensive list of competencies and so forth. So you might want to review that when you have time. Now, there are some different techniques that we can use for our job analysis in general. A few more things to know about. Position analysis, questionnaires. This again, this is really just a structured questionnaire. This is a different way to refer to it. And this technique just refers to a different academics, articles and so forth, saying this is another way to look at it and so forth. But really, it's a structured questionnaire. It's an approach that does gather a lot of information on job content and worker characteristics and so forth. Now, when we talk about a functional job analysis and so forth, and maybe using the Department of Labor procedure, we're talking about procedures used by the US Department of Labor that they've established over time. And it's just really a system that the federal government has come up with. And so there are many systems out there, and it's just one amongst many that you could choose. It categorizes worker functions, it gives them codes and so forth. And so really, more than anything, it's a highly organized structure to understand where a job fits into a family of jobs and what industries and so forth. But it is information that could be useful to you. The Comprehensive Occupation Data Analysis Program. This is something used by the US Air Force. It's a software program and allows them to find people, the right people for the right job in the U.S. Air Force. And it's tailored very much to competencies and behaviors and so forth that match up to being successful in certain jobs. The job element method came out of the Office of Personnel Management over the years. It's just another way to approach doing this. It also identifies job behavior elements and so forth. Task inventory analysis. This one is much more current, and this is more in line than the others here with what is going on in contemporary job analysis. Task inventories really are focusing on the KSOCs to do a job successfully. And so it uses surveys and so forth to really take an in-depth look at any job. The Occupational Information Network I've mentioned, this is really ONET. And ONET does have an incredible amount of information available, and it covers so many different job classifications and so forth. Now, when it comes to contextual performance, this really is, it's about the aspects of performance that are unrelated to specific tasks. This includes activities that maybe you could create or design as an HR professional that will improve the interpersonal, say, communications of your employees, taking a real look at the psychological environment that your organization has, and really trying to determine, do we have the right culture and environment to be the most successful in what we're doing? And so the context of your organization does matter, and so forth. Personality-based job analysis. This is where you might do finding the right people for a job by focusing more on personality traits. Now, this is a little riskier way to go, because any personality test that you might give an employee, it's a valid way if personality traits are certainly desired or required for the successful completion of a job, it would make sense that it would be appropriate. But the problem with these personality-based exams or tests is that they're only good for that particular day that they're taken. Personality tests happen to just turn out to be snapshots of how is that person on that given moment, because they're so influenced by affect. In other words, the emotional state of the person when they take that personality test may be different tomorrow or the day after or a week later, and change completely a month from then. If a person hasn't had breakfast, if they're not feeling well, if their social life isn't going well, if they have a lot of personal problems, if they're constantly stressed or have anxiety, they take a personality test. That's good for a snapshot right then. So consider these things as no more than one tool amongst many. And really, HR managers shouldn't rely on these as a major determinant of if you're going to follow through and actually hire someone. Now, team-based job analysis, you have to look at a variety of factors here to make this work. You have to understand and identify if teamwork is required to successfully perform that given job that you are designing, that you're doing the analysis about. And so in that sense, you have to look at three things. You have to look at the task interdependence, the goal interdependence, and the communication and cooperation required. So the task interdependence is, how are the jobs related to each other within the team? And that makes sense, because you don't need jobs that don't relate to what the team's doing within your team environment. So certainly that's sort of a no-brainer, but at the same time, you really need to make sure that, yes, this makes sense the way we're organized. Your goal interdependence means you have a team goal. You are all interdependent on the efforts collectively to achieve the goals. And so team-based job analysis has to also mention that, take into account that the goals are team goals, and that when someone receives a reward in response as an incentive for reaching a goal, everyone gets the reward, everyone gets the incentive, and so forth. And then the third one, the communication and cooperation, well, that's examining the relationships and linkages between groups. It does take cooperation to succeed within a team, and it takes cooperation to succeed between teams. And so we have to know in any given job, is there a certain level of cooperation required that needs to be mentioned in that job description, so forth. So you can see the amount of information that you are gathering for any job project is just really a significant amount. So let me wrap this up. Before you can make really informed decisions on the recruitment itself, who you're going to select, what kind of training is needed, you really need to take a look at a job and perform job analysis that focuses on incumbent employees and those who have linkages with those incumbent employees. So what is this information in a job analysis used for? Well, actually, it supports a lot of your broader activities. It helps you develop compensation systems within the company. It helps you identify the job-related competencies that are needed in your organization. It helps you objectively decide what to evaluate on performance and so forth. They have to be measurable and observable. It helps you restructure work activities as time passes and needs change. And then it helps you assess risks in the workplace. And there certainly are many things to think about along the way. You can use a lot of tools. You have choice of many different methods, choices, and you can use many different sources to gather your information. You can observe one incumbent, but you want to expand that pool if you're able, because any given incumbent may not always tell you everything you want to know. They may hold some things back, like human beings tend to do. So you're going to run into the human element. So if you have the opportunity to interview incumbents and supervisors and maybe other incumbents as well, that is the best situation for you. Job analysis will tell you how the job is structured now, and you can compare it to how you've looked at it in the past as a company and as a department in HR, and possibly how you have to change it for the future. You have to keep in mind that no one method is superior to another when you're performing your job analysis, but your top tools definitely are interviewing and using a structured questionnaire of some type. But when you use these tools and you make those choices, your purpose should always be the reason that you're using those tools. Okay, folks, that's all I've got for you this time. I'll talk to you again soon.